It's grainy. It's so grainy.
Having an in-depth understanding of ISO will help us choose the right ISO settings to get the most out of our camera's sensor.
Before we had our fancy DSLRs, mirrorless cameras, and smartphones, film was the only way to capture a moving picture. A strip of film is coated with chemicals that react to light, and how quickly it can react to a given amount of light is determined by the film speed, or ISO. The higher the ISO, the faster the reaction. The lower the ISO, the slower the reaction. ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, develops and publishes international standards, film speed being one of them. Many people use the term ISO when referring to camera sensitivity or film speed, and this is actually incorrect. The reason it's not pronounced ISO is because it's an acronym, and because International Organization of Standardization would have different acronyms in different languages, they decided to pronounce it ISO, which is derived from the Greek isis, meaning equal. But I've been indoctrinated with saying ISO, and a lot of people don't know this info and won't judge you for saying ISO. For me, it's a habit, and this is how I say it for now, but I promise I will try to fix this for future courses. The film on a digital camera is the sensor. ISO on film helps us understand how ISO affects an image on digital cameras, but it's important to note that they do not work entirely the same. Okay, here's the disclaimer. I'm not a technical expert on camera sensors and ISO, so check out the links in the notes below if you want to go down the rabbit hole that is ISO. For now, I'm just gonna do my best to get you the basics. ISO on digital cameras affects 4 things: the brightness of an exposed image, the noise in an image, dynamic range, and color accuracy. The lower the ISO, the darker an exposed image will be. The higher the ISO, the brighter an exposed image will be. ISO also affects the noise produced in a digital camera. Typically, the lower the ISO, the less noise overall. And the higher the ISO, you will start to see more noise overall. Higher noise also can cause what's called chrominance noise, and that shows up as colored pixels. ISO also affects dynamic range. Dynamic range is how a camera records the brightest and darkest parts of an image. So in a shot like this, for example, where you want to capture the leaves of this tree and the sky at the same time, you're going to be limited by the camera's dynamic range. Either we can capture the details of the tree and its leaves by blowing out the sky, or we can underexpose the tree and its leaves and maintain the details in the sky. In cameras with high dynamic range, you have a greater ability to record the details within shadows and highlights. Typically, we want to capture as much detail as possible. A lower ISO gives a greater dynamic range, and a higher ISO, a lower dynamic range. Higher ISOs also affect color accuracy. At lower ISOs, the colors are more accurate. Once you push the ISO too high, at a certain point you will see that the colors are starting to fall apart. Colors become more pale and inaccurate overall. Throughout the lower ISOs, the changes in color are quite subtle. But once you reach a certain ISO, it's very noticeable, so make sure you keep those ISOs down. And remember, every camera is different and will render noise and colors differently, even if they are at the same ISO. So let's recap this lesson. The lower the ISO, the darker the image will be, producing less noise and typically offering the greatest dynamic range, along with better color accuracy. The higher the ISO, the brighter the image will become, producing more noise and less dynamic range with reduced color accuracy. In the next lesson, we will discuss how to use ISO in real filming situations.